Once again, a very warm welcome to all of our attendees this morning, and a very big thank you to IOPSA, the Institute of Plumbing South Africa, and the wonderful work that they are doing, as well as to SIOSH, the South African Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, and then also a very big thank you to PRRB for crediting this with 0.25 CPD points. So today we are taking a look at dealing with dust. We are looking at dust in and around our working environment, and in particular we're going to take a look at dust inside the actual office space where many of us are going to be working. So it is cold. A lot of us have those air cons on nice hot heat and pumping them into our offices to keep ourselves warm, but we also just want to be cognizant of the actual danger and the risk that it also poses. So we're going to take a look at dealing with dust and what can we do to protect ourselves from this type of hazard. Now, first of all, we want to ask, what is dust? Well, the meaning is fine, dry powder consisting of tiny particles of earth or waste matter lying on the ground or on surfaces or carried in the air. And now if you take a look on the left hand side, there is a construction site with a lot of dust on it. Now we have to do dust suppression obviously when we get to a site, and this is when those huge water trucks come around, and often throughout the day at the start of the morning they are pumping out water in order to suppress that dust from constantly being raised. And this is because of tires that are driving over it, people that are walking and also working in the area, and then possibly even plant or machinery moving in and around the area. Now, why is it so dangerous? Well, for one, dust can irritate eyes, throat, and skin. So human health effects of dust relate mainly to the size of the dust particles. And we're going to take a look at something very interesting at the end of this webinar on why is dust actually so hazardous, specifically dependent on the size of the dust particle. Now, dust may contain microscopic solids or liquid droplets that are small enough to get deep into the lungs and cause serious health problems. Larger particles will then irritate the nose, throat, and eyes. Now, if ever you've worked in an environment with a lot of dust, you will realize that the effects are not just immediate, but they can also be prolonged depending on the inadequate type of protection that we might have had on that site. Perhaps even working near or close to a construction site, we've seen the damaging effects of dust, perhaps on our work areas, on our vehicles, or even on our occupation. Perhaps you are performing work that's near or around a construction site and dust interferes with the work that you are performing. If you have worked on a construction site, you will also realize that dust control is a very serious part of the entire construction program. So what do we want to essentially achieve with this toolbox talk? Well, as plumbers in the industry, there are many areas where you are going to be affected by this type of hazard. And when it comes to dust in particular, we want to know what is the best safe working procedure, the best method of suppression, as well as what are the dangers that we know of so that we can protect ourselves from it. Now, as we mentioned with plumbers, there's a lot of hazardous areas on a construction site, or even just in general when performing your plumbing works. But some areas of concern that we wanted just to touch base on this morning is looking at chasing of walls, digging trenches, drilling, and also core drilling. Now, these four areas are a few areas of concern that we've noticed while being on site. Obviously, the chasing of walls became a very, very big one because we are in a confined space, perhaps inside a room, and there's no adequate ventilation for the type of dust or the amount of dust that is going to happen in that room. So this is a constructed building. We're already inside a kitchen, we're inside a bathroom. They're generally not very large areas. And now we are having to take our power tool out and start chasing a wall in order to put the plumbing inside. Or if you need to put lagging on some of your piping, then you need to cut quite deep into the actual brickwork or concrete work in order to place your piping inside. This comes with its own individual hazard. For one, the dust is going to be circulated in and around that area without a very good means of escape, especially if we haven't made room or allowance for the extraction of that dust. Now, another thing we need to consider when doing the chasing of walls is as soon as we have the dust inside the room and we extract that dust, where are we pumping it to? See, essentially, we want to capture that dust and suppress it from actually just flowing outside and causing a hazard to someone else. Now, we have had it on site where someone was working inside a building, but part of the building was closed out. And this, unfortunately, was on the first floor, and there were 4 floors of the actual building. So the second, third, and fourth floor were all pretty much being affected by the dust that was pumped out the windows just because of the natural ventilation, flowed up, and obviously created huge dust clouds in and around the working environment where the plumbers were working. And this then entered all the other areas that were not under construction. People were working inside offices. This affected printing machines. It affected electronics such as laptops, PCs. It went as far as even entering, unfortunately, in this case, into the server rooms where it should not have entered and damaged some equipment there. Now you can imagine the amount of headache that this construction crew went through when the building managers realized, or the company owners realized, how much damage was being caused to the electronic equipment as well as the environment for the employees. So really, this is what we want to essentially stop and minimize. But not just that, we also want to stop and minimize the effect on the individual who is actually holding that power tool. Whether you are the one chasing the wall, we need to understand how much dust is generated between chasing a wall and digging a trench. Well, it comes down to how large is the chase going to be, how deep is the trench going to be, how wide is it going to be. If it is slightly smaller, well, you're not doing it for a large period of time. Perhaps you're using a back actor or some sort of excavator to perform that. Then the individual automatically is not 100% exposed to it. He might be in a cab inside the plant. But what about those in and around that environment? What kind of dust suppression is needed then? For the chasing of walls, is that person doing chasing 8 hours of the day in order to make sure that the entire area is opened for the piping? Well, all of this needs to be taken into consideration. Now, why do we mention that? Well, the risk assessment is the most important tool here in order to, first of all, prevent this hazard so that the dust is minimized to an acceptable degree. But at the same time, the safe working procedures on working with tools that create dust must also be considered. And then we take a look at the actual PPE. Now you take a look at the top left-hand corner, there are 2 different types of dust masks that we've put in there for you. And this depends on the amount of dust and also the type of dust that you're going to be dealing with. Slightly more solid dust particles coming from like digging trenches, you could just use a normal dust mask. But when we're going through concrete, asbestos, or perhaps working on a site where there's silica dust, all those are finer, smaller particles, perhaps even working with cement at certain times, you will notice that the top respirator is probably going to be more ideal for that working environment, especially for the extended period of time that you might be working. Again, refer to your risk assessment to tell you which is the best type of PPE. So the risk assessor really must be on the ball to know what are you performing, the task, the time frame, what is being chased, what is the material that is being cut or dug into. Even when it comes to drilling or core drilling, all of that information needs to be set out in a safe working procedure so that the risk assessment can be documented properly, and the individual performing the work can then obviously be protected with the correct type of safe working procedure on the risk assessment side, the PPE side, as well as the proper training on what to do. Now, when we talk about plumbers, many of you out in the industry, you work both outside and you work inside offices. And it has happened that many companies have had people going on sick leave because they feel like they're just getting the seasonal flu. However, air conditioning can also be at fault. Now, inside the office, we take a look at two areas. For one, you've got parking lots, and then on the inside, you've also got HVAC or aircon systems. Now, inside a vehicle, the filters will trap any particles in the air, and they prevent contaminants from getting into the engine of the vehicle. But if we do not have correct maintenance and we are not cleaning and checking these filters, then too much sand or dust can clog that air filter and reduce the airflow to the engine. Well, what is the result? It will lead to overheating and internal damage to your vehicle. So something as simple as dust in and around the area, unclean cars, poor housekeeping on our vehicles or in and around our office areas by the parking spaces can create a very costly hazard to our company vehicles. When we walk inside the office, air conditioning can pose another threat to our employees who are working as office-based employees. Now, air conditioning sickness starts where the air conditioners and bacteria, fungi, mold, and mildew meet. This moisture can create an ideal environment for bacteria and mold to grow if not cleaned properly. So poorly maintained air conditioners can also distribute the Legionella bacteria, as we spoke about a few months ago, where we had the entire Legionella month, and we spoke about 4 areas of Legionella and the Legionnaire's disease and why it is so dangerous, because it can be potentially fatal. So yes, dust not only can damage us immediately while working, but it can damage the tools, equipment, our vehicles. It can then also cause long-term diseases as well as potential fatalities in the future. So we don't want to disregard dust as a hazard. We need to keep ourselves and our areas as clean as possible. Now, how do you keep your aircon clean? Well, we spoke to some in the industry that install aircons, and again, the first thing we're going to say is follow the manufacturer's guidelines. If they have to have a regular treated time frame or regular maintenance that they come out and perform those maintenance sessions, then rather just stick to that. But most of the guys that I've spoken to out in the industry say to me, Chris, there's a few very simple things that you can do. Open up the actual aircon from the front, obviously making sure you disconnect it first. And then you will notice that there's maybe 1 or 2 little screws that only hold in the filter section. So we're not touching anything out on the compressor on the outside. We're not taking off the AC unit on the inside. We're just opening up the flap that is very easy to open. There's no huge maintenance issues here. But when we take out that filter, we just really want to clean it off. There's a specific solution sometimes that they will provide for you that you can then spray on. And what this does is it neutralizes any bacteria from contaminating that filter. And this can just be cleaned and wiped off. And then this is obviously performed pretty regularly. Now, there was a difference in opinion on how often this should be done, but the consensus was, how often are you using the air conditioner? So if it's in summer and you're using it pretty often to keep the environment cool, well then a few guidelines were every week, make sure you have a regular inspection, but we would perform regular cleaning every month. So that was pretty much the consensus between the 4 air conditioning technicians that we spoke to. And they basically said, do not allow the aircon to work overnight or for too longer periods of time. It also depends on the type of aircon being used. But your smaller ones, your 9,000 BTU or your 12,000 BTUs that we generally find in offices, should not be left on overnight. They should also not be pumping on the lowest temperature or the highest temperature. Now, When it's summer and it's blistering hot outside, the first thing we do is put it all the way down to low and we leave it on. And then if it is freezing cold in the morning, as soon as you get into the office, we pump it all the way to high and we leave it there. Now, you might say, well, it's designed to go that high or it's designed to go that low, and that is 100% true. But if you think of your rev count on your car, it is able to rev at 6, 7, 8,000 revs RPM, and it can do that. It's within the safety allowance. But would you do that all the time while you are driving? Or would you allow it to rev only at the lowest revs possible, almost as if it's idling? Well, you're going to find problems at both spectrums. Now, there are times where you could leave it to idle for a certain period of time, and there are times where you might over rev it, perhaps if you trying to overtake someone and you need the few extra revs to change into a lower gear. But generally, you're not keeping it there for very, very long periods of time. You're going to then calm down using your gears in order to push the vehicle forward. It is the same with your aircon. So you do have an auto setting where as soon as the aircon is switched on, you can then regulate it, pump it in the morning for half an hour to an hour, get the office warm, and then set it to auto to keep the temperature at the temperature that you want. But do not set it on the highest rating with the highest fan setting, constantly pumping in hot air. Remember, aircon sickness can also result if the aircon is used on too cold for too long. And this is both in the office as well as in our vehicles. So what is the end result? We want you to know the dangers when it comes to larger dust particles. And this particularly we are finding a lot on site. For those of you chasing walls, doing your core drilling, or doing any type of trench work when you're on site to install your plumbing, your health is at risk, especially if it is finer dust, because that finer dust is the most dangerous. Now, the reason is larger particles tend to get blocked by your nose hairs or the hair-like cilia cells and mucus lining in your airways, stopping them from getting into the lungs. But the smaller particles are able to evade those natural defenses, and these are the particles that get absorbed into the bloodstream or trapped in the lungs. Well, why is this dangerous? Well, even though our body does have white blood cells that bind to and destroy dust particles in the lungs, long-term exposure to high concentrations of dust will be harmful to your health. Those exposed to dusty environments are at a greater risk of developing respiratory illness, which can impact their quality of life and can also be fatal. So we want you to protect yourself from this type of danger. As plumbers, you are working in an industry where you are constantly exposed to this danger, especially if you are doing one of those four things, which is chasing of walls, digging of trenches, if you are doing any type of drilling for anchorage, as well as types of core drilling as well. And then just remember, in general, while we are driving around, if we're in and around a construction site or even in our offices, we're being exposed to these tiny particles all the time. So yes, we do have natural protection against this. We also have masks that we are wearing, but we just want to ensure that we have the right protection, the most effective protection, and the most adequate protection for the type of task we are performing. So thank you very much for joining us this morning on dust and how to handle dust and how to mitigate this potential danger from causing long-term dangers to ourselves by stopping it immediately and then mitigating future or potential incidents in the future. So thank you very much once again to IOPSA, to SIOSH, as well as PRB, and then a very, very big thank you to all of our attendees. We're looking for a few of you coming up in the next weeks. We are going to be getting back to a lot of your emails. We thank you so much for those questions. We did realize that the issue again, because of so many emails being received, we've had to just increase the size of our inboxes because we were getting a bit overloaded. So I apologize for those who we missed out last week. Coming up in August, we're taking a look at a few other Toolbox talk topics, hazardous environments when working in ceilings. We'll take a look at hygiene and why this is so important, especially around COVID-19 at the moment. We then take a look at all of you OHS representatives and what your responsibilities are in terms of plumbing, especially with the safety files while you are working on site. And then we have a how-to section on harnesses. Many of us are climbing up ladders, using scaffolding, or operating cherry pickers and scissors lifts. Why is a harness so important, and why do we need to wear it, and how do we don a harness safely? So thank you very much once again to everybody out there, especially for your attendance and your feedback. And we look forward to seeing you next week.